This whole thing started in New Zealand last night for us, and we watched the first part of that, and it's become traditional for us to kind of honor those Australia, New Zealand ways of wanting to start a meeting. So just want to acknowledge that this land that Jill and I are sitting on here in Chicago, that we're talking from, and that we're all in North America somewhere talking, that this wasn't our land originally, and that it's built on genocide and on enslaved labor of both the indigenous people of this continent and of people that were imported from Africa, and that all of the wonderful things that we're enjoying right now, they're enabling us to communicate with each other at a distance and have these fine computers, and the whole industrial revolution wouldn't exist without that settler colonial stuff that happened, and just wanting to at least acknowledge that that exists if we can't make full reparations for it at any moment. So welcome to our stolen, wonderful abode here.
And we want to thank the Narrative Therapy Initiative for creating this series of stories and conversations that link us throughout the world, or parts of the world. And we're happy to be part of it.
And I think we were going to introduce each other, and I think, Suzanne, you were going to start by introducing yourself and Maggie?
No.
Yeah.
And Kelly.
And Kelly?
Hello, everyone. So I'm Suzanne Gazzolo. I'm actually in southern Michigan right now, sitting on a screened-in porch. So you might hear birds, and it sounds like some lawn care is going on too. So hopefully that's not going to be distracting. But I'm really grateful to be here, and I have the privilege of introducing Kelly. Kelly George, and there's just no way to possibly capture all that that I know about Kelly George, but I can maybe just say I thought of inviting Kelly because of their just enthusiasm and energy that always kind of is contagious for me. And so when I thought about a storyteller, I thought, well, this is someone that I think people are really going to enjoy listening to, and that has energy that might actually like transfer out of Zoom somehow and reach all of us. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm Jill Friedman from Evanston Family Therapy Center, which is in the Chicago area. And I am introducing Maggie Crowley. Maggie's a psychologist who works at Miles Square Health Center, which serves underserved people. And I've known Maggie for about 20 years, and the images from her stories always stay with me. So I thought she would be a fantastic person to be telling stories for this. I think in the last hour, Kathleen talked about how she comes from a family that doesn't tell stories. And I think for Maggie, it's the opposite. She comes from a family with lots and lots of stories. And I often think of images from her stories. And one that I was thinking about this morning, I hope I get this right, Maggie. Maggie was going to give a lecture at a hospital, and her mother decided to come and attend. And so she was sitting in the audience, and Maggie spoke, And then she asked if there would be comments or questions. And her mother, who I think is a really petite woman, stood up glowing and she said, "That's my daughter." And I love that story.
Me too.
So welcome.
Yeah. And I'm Gene Combs, and I live with Jill. I'm really happy that my friend of more than 2 decades, 3 decades, I don't know how far back we go, has agreed to join us today. Makungu Akinyela is somebody I've known. I was thinking, Makungu, I've known you on 3 different continents. I think I've known you in North America, I've known you in Europe, I've known you in Australia, and also some really warm memories of times we were in Cuba together, and got a glimpse of some of your connections to that thing. And I think why I thought of Makungu it is that he is this person that every time I'm around Makungu, I find out a new layer of who he is and what he's been through in the world. I know him as a psychologist, as an academic, scholarly psychologist, also as a family therapist, and he's written both scholarly materials and kind of helpful family advice kinds of stuff. I've seen him in his full-on preacher mode, and that is something awesome. I heard he delivered, it was more of a secular sermon on reparations once upon a time that still sticks in my mind as something. I've known him as somebody who kind of embodies what I know about Afrocentrism and what's admirable about that. And I also just know him as an entrepreneur and somebody who's interested in travel and just broadly interested in the world. And I'm sure that whatever Makungu wants to share with us today is going to be worth listening to. So welcome, Makungu.
I realize I neglected a few things about Kelly, so is it okay if I just add a couple things?
Sure.
Not that, but Kelly recently, as we're all dealing with this, is also importantly a new parent, has started a new therapy practice, and is kind of newlywed. So I think there's been a lot of new things in Kelly's life that's also just want to let people know about.
Mm-hmm. Appreciate that. So I guess that's a good segue into where we were going to begin. Is that okay?
Please.
Awesome. So when Suzanne invited me to participate in this storytelling event, I got very excited because I have loved every opportunity I have had to engage more with narrative ideas and narrative experiences, and I felt really honored to have the opportunity to participate in something that's connecting us and our experiences in a time where we are fundamentally disconnected. And about 30 seconds after the invite, I immediately thought of a story of what has marked my quarantine experience. So I'm here in Chicago. I am on the north side of the city. And as Suzanne mentioned, I'm a relatively new parent. I have a 16-month-old named Philippa. And she turned 1 shortly before the quarantine began. And we were very intentional with building a community around Philippa. I have lots of chosen family that is a part of her life, and she gets to see them a whole lot. And all these people had come to her birthday, and it had been a lot of fun. And then very suddenly, all of our worlds changed, including hers. But it's a little different when you're 16 months old because nobody can explain to you what's going on and why it's safer to not see your friends anymore, and why you can't go to the park anymore, and why your nanny who's immunocompromised can't come take care of you anymore. And it's really hard to keep a small toddler. If there's any people in the audience with kids, you know this. It's very hard to keep a small toddler inside all the time, especially as the weather is getting nicer and nicer. And we did the best we could, but increasingly Philippa was getting a little stir crazy and the backyard wasn't cutting it. We have a carrier that we take her in, and she would come over and she'd hand it to me and look very serious and squawk at me. Like, I'm ready to go outside now. She'd scratch at the front door and, would point out the window and just was needing to get outside. And all the parks in Chicago are closed. And in the area that I live in, there's not a lot of open green space. We live in a pretty urban area. And I was walking around with her in the carrier, kind of walking around the block, trying to figure out, well, what am I going to do? Where am I going to take her? And we came upon an old, kind of overgrown cemetery. And it didn't look like anybody had been there in a long time. And so I was like, well, why not? You know, people like babies, maybe dead people like babies. So let's go in and check this out. So we went in, and Flip was looking around, checking things out. So I take her out of the carrier and I put her down, and she looks around. And then she starts running around and giggling and poking the flowers and running up and down the aisleways. And it was the first time I had seen that joy again since quarantine had started. Like, she was just so happy to be outside in open space where she could run around and see the flowers and, you know, and have a good time. And this is particularly interesting for me in my experience, because in my family, death is not handled very well. My aunt told me the other day that she remembers my grandmother as being, in her words, quite morbid. And so they would spend a lot of time going to cemeteries and visiting family, and they had very structured rules about how to be in the cemetery and how to visit family there. And there was one point at which, when my mother was quite young, so in the southern United States, there's a tradition of when somebody passes away in your family, you might do a viewing in the house. And so they were doing a viewing in the house for an uncle or somebody that had passed away. And my grandmother insisted that my mother, who was quite young at the time, had to go and see the body. And my mother, who is probably one of the most stubborn women I know, adamantly refused. She didn't want to see the body. But my grandmother was even more stubborn and won out and convinced my mother to go up and see the body. And at that moment, one of two things happened. Either the biology of death had incredible timing, or my mother's fantastical imagination took over, and perhaps a combination of both. My mother was convinced she saw the body move. And she ran out that house as fast as she could and refused to go back in for the rest of the day. They finally had to drag her back in at the end of the day. And so from that moment on, my mother was never comfortable with funerals. She was never comfortable with any kind of like proceedings around death, which is ironic because my mother is a nurse. And so she could manage it, right? She could manage it on a professional level, but on a personal level, no. So I never went to cemeteries or went to funerals growing up. So I had no exposure to any of this. And so my parents sent me, now I did not grow up Catholic, but I somehow ended up going to a Catholic school for a few years as a child. And I guess one of the things that you do when you go to Catholic school is you go on Catholic, field trips where you go and see all the Catholic things. So I grew up outside Louisville, so we were visiting different cathedrals and that kind of stuff. And there's a cemetery outside Louisville called Calvary Cemetery that hosts about 58,000 residents, we'll say. And so the bus drives up, and I won't get off the bus. The only thing I'd ever heard about cemeteries is that they were creepy, weird, and you didn't want to go there. So I wouldn't get all my peers are, getting off the bus and being yelled at by the nuns not to hang on the crosses and, not to, run around. And they can't get me off the bus. And so finally they convinced me, they're like, it's going to be okay. Like, everything's going to be okay. So I get off the bus and I take a few steps and I'm like, okay. And I take a step and my foot sinks into the dirt a little bit. And I am convinced I have stepped on a fresh grave. There's a body imminently beneath me, and I am not about to go down like that. So I bolt back onto the bus, back of the bus, as far back as I get, and refuse to move and get off the bus for the rest of the trip. So needless to say, I do not have the most positive association with cemeteries. For a long time, I considered, this is a waste of space. Why we're big old space for all these dead bodies. We could have a park, or we could all this kind of stuff. And when my grandfather died about 6 years ago was the first time I understood the desire to have a place for reflection and memory and to visit somebody who's passed. But I still was not a place I felt really comfortable. And so it is really interesting to me that my quarantine experience is highlighted by visiting a cemetery. Because as we are in the midst of this time of mourning and grief and death and fear, which I think sometimes is how I viewed cemeteries, we also have opportunities for joy and hope and light and laughter, which is my daughter. And so it's this interesting juxtaposition of seeing my young daughter running around a cemetery having a good time, and me, we're all in this place of having nothing but time to reflect on our experiences and our relationship with things. And so part of my quarantine experience is having to reflect on my relationship with death and the rituals around death, and an opportunity to break a problematic story for my child so that she doesn't have this negative association. So that's kind of where I first went to when thinking about this. And we had talked about that, from here, we would just kind of see for Maggie and Makungu, like, where does that take you?
Kelly, can you hear me, everybody?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Okay, yeah. As you were talking, I was thinking I probably had the exact opposite life experience. Funerals and things like that were like it's like everybody that died, I was at the funeral, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and there were always funerals all the time. Even though my wife, in a very similar way, and when she was growing up, they never went to funerals. They didn't talk about death, things like that. So that was different. So that was always really interesting. I'll say strange to me, right?
Mm-hmm.
People who had this kind of distant relationship with death. I can appreciate I guess the irony that the graveyard becomes a place of refuge for you at this time.
Yeah.
And has really challenged and changed that. I was when Jean first emailed me and asked me about, actually it was Jill, yes, about participating in this. I had no idea, what this would look like or what it was, and I guess the how this kind of a situation creates these webs of connection and memory and experience for us, just like it did for you. And it's really weird. As I began to think about it, it has done that for me. I think I mentioned yesterday, as some of us were kind of gathering and talking about this, for some weird reason, particularly when this thing first started, when we had to shelter in place and we were locked down, and there was this nervousness about, dang, what's going on? What's happening? There was even a little fear, right? This idea that you had to be locked down. And I know for us, as we began hearing that, I think right now it's 25% of all the deaths in the United States are Black people dying, right? Even though we are only 13% of the total population. And so that's creating all this anxiety and fear. And it's like, okay, what are we supposed to do with this information? And it's in a really weird way, just like somehow this is like linked you back to graveyards, right? This experience started linking me back to 41 years ago. And 41 years ago, I was much younger. But I was really very fortunate I was a part of the 11th contingent of the Vincent Amos Brigade. The Vincent Amos Brigade was an organization that had begun in the early 60s, taking young people, university students, activists, to Cuba to witness the Cuban Revolution, to see what the Cuban Revolution was really about, as opposed to the propaganda that comes out of the U.S. blockade. And my girlfriend at the time had gone on the 9th or 10th Brigade, and and been there stayed in Cuba for a couple of months. And so I'm going on the 11th. And it was for those of you who are a little younger, like Kelly, I guess, probably, you don't look like you may remember that time, but it's the height of the Cold War. So it's extremely tense. You know, I mean, we had to use all kinds of, it was like out of a spy movie, right? So we had to like hide in safe houses and, you know, for a couple of days before we actually got on the plane, and watch out for the FBI watching us and things like this, and going through different countries. And eventually we got to Cuba. And we did what the brigade does. We met Cuban people, we worked. It was exciting because it was at actually a high time of the Cuban Revolution, when the people were really resisting the blockade. I've been back to Cuba several times since then, and I'm really proud to be able to see. I see some of the buildings that I helped to build back then. That's what we did. We worked. We built apartment buildings. I contributed to building a monument to martyrs at that time, Cuban soldiers who had died in Angola. I helped to build a monument to the Cuban soldiers who had died in Angola fighting against the racist South African regime. It was an exciting time, right? We worked in a camp. There were brigadistas from all over the country. So I met all these other young people. But something happened about the same time, almost 41 years ago to the date of this time. There was a nuclear power plant on the east coast of the United States, 3 Mile Island, and it melted down. Now, nobody knew what melting down meant at that time, I guess, but we all learned. It's like, but I'm in Cuba. Cuba, it was hard to get information in or out, right? There's no direct phone lines. Maybe you could get a telegram out or whatever. I've got my girlfriend back there. I'm missing her like crazy, right? Don't know what's going on. And then all of a sudden we get word that there's this meltdown. And so we're assuming that the whole East Coast has just like gone up in a nuclear cloud. That's all we know, right? So we're like, okay, what are we going to, we're locked down here. We're in Cuba. Are we ever going to be able to go home, right? That's kind of the feeling that I got reminded of, right? Particularly in the early days of this shelter in place, the uncertainty of knowing what this all means. I began, of course, to tell myself a story. I wasn't hearing from my girlfriend at the time. She don't care about me. She, nobody, I haven't heard anything, right? Finally, some representatives from the brigade, actually one of whom right now is a prominent state congresswoman in a prominent state here. I don't know if she ever wants people to know that she was leading the Vincent Amos Brigade.
Maybe not.
Who was a very good friend of ours. Brought some messages, including some letters. And at that moment, I got this letter from my girlfriend that she had gotten had gotten some information from me. She had ignored me. And not only that, while I was gone, she was missing me as much as I missed her. She decided that we were going to get married. So she went and talked to my parents, talked to her parents, and they planned a wedding in the next, I think, 4 months after if I ever got back. She wrote this letter, we're getting married. I talked to your parents, they agreed, right? And it's like, okay. And so that just kind of changed the whole atmosphere. Of course, 3 Mile Island didn't blow up the whole East Coast. And eventually, after several more weeks of work and doing international work, I was able to get home, but I got back home to a whole new kind of life when I got back there. So that's kind of what it makes me think of.
Yeah. Well, thank you both, Kelly and Mukungu. Both of your stories kind of blend for me in a couple of ways. So Kelly, yours, for me, it was your ability to sort of really know what your daughter needed, and that she was itching to get out, and you were trying to find a place for her. and finding kind of what might look like an unlikely place for a parent and child to play, but doing it anyway, and really kind of doing it anyway for her, you know, putting aside your own fear. And it reminds me of when I was a kid, and my dad sort of playing with me, and I saw my dad. I have a brother. There's 5 of us. I have an older brother, myself, 2 younger brothers, and a younger sister. But my dad was teaching my older brother, who's 2 years older than me, to shoot a BB gun in the backyard. And it was a rifle BB gun, you know, that you had to pump. And I really wanted, I wanted to learn how as well. And so my memory of that is talking my dad into playing Charlie's Angels with me, which is a very old TV show. I think I was 8 or 9 at the time, of 3 women detectives that solved crime and, you know, kind of went out and did things. And so I talked my dad into teaching me how to shoot this BB gun that was probably at the time half the size of me. And so I'm marching around in the yard with this big BB gun, and my dad and I both have blocks for pretend walkie-talkies. He's probably got a Budweiser in one hand and a block in the other. And he did this with me. I don't even know for how long. And so your story really takes me to that place of really seeing what somebody needs, that might be invisible, and giving it to them. And Makungu, your story too takes me to a very similar experience, but in a different way. You know, when you said, are we ever going to be able to go back home again? And this resonates with me because my experience of this quarantine is very much what both of you are talking about. It's really bringing up how connected I am and how much I need the people in my life, and also how just so very disconnected I feel in all this. And my sort of disconnected piece of that fits with Makungo wondering if you're ever going to be able to go back home again was my dad, of course. But this time we weren't on block walkie-talkies. I was in college, and a freshman in college, and terribly homesick. Now, nobody in my family has left to go anywhere. Like, no one's gone to college. Nobody in my family or extended family, which probably accounts for over 100 people, have never left Illinois. So they don't go far. And so when I was at college and just having a very hard time missing my family, and I knew they were missing me too, and either my dad would call me or I would call him, and really wondering if you know, if we disappeared, you know, we just felt so disconnected and far away from each other. We really weren't. My folks are in a suburb of Chicago, and I was in downstate Illinois at college. So I was in the same state. But anyways, what it really reminded me of is when we would call, and neither of us, we might get out one word. Maybe I would say, "Hey, Dad," or "Dad," and he would say, "Mag," and we would just, usually we couldn't talk right away. We would both just cry. And it was really wonderful because for me, we really honored this ache, you know, this kind of ache of being so disconnected. And I loved that neither of us had to cover it up, you know, that I could ache for him and he could ache for me. And we could have a good cry, because we usually did. We couldn't talk, and then we could go on with things. And so, you know, I appreciate those 2 stories that you both told, because they really resonate with just how discrepant this time is for me, or how these really opposite things are sort of being so connected and so disconnected. So thank you both.
Yeah, Mukungu, when you said will I ever get to go home again? Like I felt my like heart jump into my throat of just like one envisioning like how scared you must have been in that experience, being so far from home and being far from your loved ones, and also resonating at the same time of like, oh my God, that's how I feel right now too. Like it's completely different, and the danger level is completely different, and the knowledge we have is completely different, and yet at the same time, like pining for a normalcy that we won't get again, you know. And I think, Maggie, that's a little of what you're speaking to as well, of just like these like wanting to go home again, and also recognizing that the world we knew no longer exists. You know, there is the world that we're in now, and then there will eventually be a world after this, but it will look different than it did before this. And just kind of also knowing like we don't get to go home again, you know. In some ways we do, and in some ways we won't.
As we were talking now, Kelly, I started thinking about when you started talking about having your daughter in the going to the graveyard first of all, and that thought, well, people like babies, maybe dead people like babies. I all of a sudden the idea of the Day of the Dead came up to me. In terms of, that people go out and they basically have picnics with their ancestors, right?
Yeah.
Where people where ancestors are a normal part of the family, and as you take that time out to spend time so that the ancestors can enjoy the family and the family can enjoy the ancestors. And so I kind of had that picture coming up to me as you start, I guess you start you're shifting your idea about what's appropriate, what's good, right?
Yeah.
And including a wider idea of who can be allies and friends.
Yeah.
That makes sense, right? Which a lot of people do around the world anyway, in terms of finding ways to honor the dead, to honor ancestors, to include them in whatever we're experiencing and what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like, who are we enlisting right now to be on our side? And we joke that there's one, so normally she kind of ignores the headstones. She doesn't really understand them, but there's one that she visits semi-regularly. His name is Albert. He died about 150 years ago at about 22 years old. So we always go say hi to Albert. And I always wonder, like, what draws her when she is drawn to a headstone, like why? Like what are you communicating with, and who, and it's just interesting to, I appreciate that, of just kind of like, who are we enlisting right now, and who are we connecting with that perhaps we wouldn't have before.
Shall we enter the conversation?
Well, yeah, I was just wondering if any of the three of you, before we jump in too much, is thought of another story you'd like to tell? I mean, has any of what this conversation touched on other incidents you'd like to share with us? We've still got some generous time left, and I'm fascinated by all your stories.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'm thinking again about how this changes situations. I talked about, well, my girlfriend then is my wife now, right? We
She
did
clearly
get
planned a good wedding.
oh, well, actually, no, now that's the part, is that once immediately, and I pulled out my diary from that time. And I immediately, when I discovered that she had decided to have this wedding, I wrote on my diary, I'm going to have to start creating developing a creative ceremony. I basically designed the wedding. You know?
I love that.
but um, but also I'm thinking in terms of what has happened now. I think I mentioned when we were talking yesterday. One of the reasons that I could not catch up with her, besides the fact that communication was so terrible, is that when I left to go to Cuba, she was interviewing for a new job. She got a job working for a major airline and had to go away to do training for a month. And I had no idea that had happened. And so I'm trying to call her, and in sporadic times, or and she's not getting any of those messages, on top of the fact that communication was just bad. And so, of course, what we do in our minds when things don't go the way we want, I'm thinking the worst. She's avoiding me. Why isn't she home? Why didn't she answer? All those things. But of course, it was all in my imagination. But one of the things that's happened now is, after working for that airline for 41 years, I think I mentioned, she decided, because of all this, to take the opportunity and just retire. So the airlines was happy because they're trying to get rid of all the people they're having to pay too much money, right? So that they can, so they can hire new people that they don't have to pay, that they don't, that have no union protection, all this kind of stuff. And so, but for us, it was an interesting and a good thing. And so for the last few weeks or so, we've been spending a hell of a lot of time together, right? Which is actually interesting. It's good. It's giving us a chance to catch up, kind of get back to a work rhythm that we haven't had. So there are some good things that can come out of this bad situation that we're in. So I'm thinking that, it's like all that history that's been rolling for 41 years coming back around to this time. And so we're kind of actually, having some fun together. Exercise together, ride bikes together, whatever, and drinking too much wine together, things like that.
I love that, like the time it reminds you of is a time of separation, and the time that you're in now is a time of connection with her.
Mm-hmm. It is.
That's really beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Something I had mentioned when we were meeting yesterday was, generally I feel like when people do things like retire, or, there's a lot of, if there's anybody out there who's supposed to be graduating right now, who's watching, congratulations. And acknowledging that, like, what a hard time to graduate and not have the ritual that we associate with graduations, with retirements. A lot of weddings are getting canceled right now or moved. So just all those events in our lives that have been disrupted. And I think we also, in the narrative community, talk a lot about the importance of ritual and how do we recreate that in a space where it's really hard to connect. Totally going to call out Maggie to share a story in a second about that. But I've been going around doing a photo series of quarantine birthdays. So my spouse had a quarantine birthday, and lots of people in Chicago have been like covering their house in balloons and like doing all kinds of stuff to signify like somebody here has a birthday. And just like, I feel like it's something that's very much marking this time, is like people having to celebrate in new ways. And Maggie, what are one of those ways that you celebrated that?
Well, I couldn't pull up our little video. It was just way too grainy, but my family is big on, my extended family is very big on celebrating birthdays in one way, shape, or form. I don't know that my kids like it as much as I do, but on your birthday, we always meet up somewhere, but on your actual birthday, everybody calls you and sings happy birthday, and all these weird and wacky voices and songs and rap songs and reggae. And I love it. But anyways, so my nephew had a, birthday, his 14th birthday, and he is he's also graduating 8th grade this year. So we were trying to figure out what to do, and I love music and I love to dance, And I have 3 children. My oldest is 30, and then the younger boys are 17 and 14. And the boys love music, not my music. They kind of like their own, and they sort of like to dance. But I talked the boys and my husband into surprising our nephew for a birthday. And what we did was we glued glow sticks to our bodies, to our clothes, taped it actually. And if you do it at dark, you look like stick figures. All you can see is these glow stick people. And so we went over to my nephew's house. It was gonna be a surprise, and went in the backyard. My 14-year-old made a compilation of one of my nephew's favorite songs and then some other songs. And so we, played the song and danced the glow stick people in their backyard. And, our stuff was coming apart. And, but to me, what was so touching is I think my boys were, I know my nephew, he liked it. My brother and sister-in-law, thought it was great. And just to show up and surprise them. But what was really touching to me is my boys were so embarrassed with this whole thing, but they did, like, they knew that it was so important. And I was, taping these glue sticks. And so it really was it was a sweet thing for them to do for me. And sort of knowing that it was important for me. And, as we're talking about these really discrepant experiences, I loved this, right? We're dancing, we got music on, we're in somebody's backyard. Like, this is my deal. And I thought it was so great. And my husband and kids are doing it. And then we get home, and my oldest son, who's 17, he's on the phone with one of his friends, and he says, "Dude, I just had the most degrading experience of my life." Like, what? So it was just, you just never know how these things are going to go. But we were trying to celebrate and bring a little bit of joy in this, time where celebrations are extremely difficult, and, and we're feeling so disconnected.
I was wondering, for those of us who've gone through a few things, I have a brief memory, for instance, of the Cuban Missile Crisis, right? I guess maybe being in the, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, I don't know, whenever that was, how this time affects children. And I've been looking at my grandchildren. My granddaughter is 5. And speaking of ceremonies, she just had a graduation ceremony from her preschool. So they had a drive-by graduation. So parents put their kids in cars, decorated the cars, and drove them by the school while the faculty and staff was outside waving at them. They gave them some kind of little diplomas or something like that. And of course, so I've got these pictures of my granddaughter, right, with wearing her mask, right, all dressed up for her graduation, just, waving from the car. They drove by here. We took pictures of them in the car, the whole thing. So I just wonder, 40 years from now, how those children will remember these events in their lives, right? How they'll remember graduations or not graduations or proms or other things like that. What will be the significance of this event, right, in their lives, and the kind of meaning that they'll apply to it, right? And 40 years from now, when there's some other catastrophe and they're sitting on a Zoom or whatever sits in for Zoom in 40 years, what kind of stories and how will they tell those stories?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think about that a lot with my daughter, because I don't know, it's hard to say how long this will last, but she's at a point now where she's not forming many permanent long-term memories, but she will only know life after this. And just how this will change some of the experiences that she has. It was a couple weeks ago, we had a mask that we had hooked on a doorknob, and she's a little mimic, and she went over and pulled the mask and was trying to put it on her head. And on one hand, it was like, oh, good, like we're doing this enough that you see that this is an important thing to do. But there was also something immensely heartbreaking about seeing that and seeing her like try to put this mask on. And she doesn't like it when we wear the masks. Like when I have her in the carrier, sometimes she tries to pull it down because she doesn't like it because she can't see us. She, with my wife, she wants to pull it down so she can give her kisses, because she's like, I can't get to your face and I want to kiss you. So she tries to like pull the mask down so she can kiss her face, which is very sweet. But I appreciate you bringing that up of like, how will this, like, I will absorb this differently than she will, and I appreciate you bringing up like, how will children remember this time? How will they talk about this time?
Yeah.
Jill, Suzanne, what are you all thinking?
I was at that moment about remembering times of hardship and difficulty. I had a really strong pull to something that happened just, I think it's been about 2 years ago. I had, I was scheduled to teach 5 days of narrative therapy in Istanbul. And it was about 20 minutes before I was supposed to start teaching. I walked out of the restroom and slipped on a wet step and fell down and broke my ankle and my wrist. And I went on to teach the 5 days. At the end of the first day, my wrist was like 5 times its original size. My ankle was completely swollen. So in many ways, it was just this horrible situation. But what I remember the most is how much people cared for me. That I was, my host Mehmet Dink and Aisha, his partner, took me to the emergency room where people were wonderful to me. Somebody from the hospital came every day to make sure that I could move my fingers. We went to do some shopping, and we were at a mall, and the only way they were like, they stopped the whole escalator so that people could help me get on, and then they started it again with people on either side of me. There were just so many acts of care. David Newman, my colleague, was teaching in the next room, and in the morning he would come to my room and put socks on my feet, so because I couldn't do that with the ankle and the wrist. And Mehmet bought me a business class ticket to go back home. My ticket wasn't upgradable, and he insisted as the host that he was just going to do that so that my leg could be up. And so I was, as you're talking about the memories of this time, there's also the care that I was really, really in touch with, the care that people took of me and what could have been. So my memories are good ones. They're mostly of like being cared for. So that's one of the things I was thinking about just in this last little piece that you were talking about.
Yeah, the image of Maggie's boys doing something degrading, despite
Degrading means they liked it, by the way. They thought it was hilarious. That 17-year-old talk for like, this shit was hilarious.
I just loved that that idea that we do things just like Kelly walking through a graveyard for their daughter, and And I don't know, I don't have a sense, Makungu, if you enjoyed designing the wedding, but that really, kind of captured me too. Just,
Oh, I loved it. I love, absolutely.
Mm.
yeah. So it just had me think about like what we're willing to do for the people we care most about. And I, and then it also has me just thinking about, Maggie, your stories about your dad. I was thinking about my own, it just had me thinking about my own dad, and I lost him when I was in my early 20s. And I feel like when I lost him, like the colors of the world changed and they've never changed back. So as I think of this time, that's also where I'm transported, is just, there are some things that are just going to be different. And not necessarily absent, but how to keep hold of things even though they're different, I think is what this conversation has me thinking about.
Several disparate images have come to me over this time, and I'm going to ramble a bit, and I think there's a thread that runs through them, but maybe you'll see it, maybe you won't. This question of it's going to be different as we come out of this, and it's not going to be the same world, and feeling a responsibility to do whatever large or small things I can do and my community can do and my friends such as you all can do, to see that it's more the kind of world we want to live in, is both an inspiration and a crushing pressure to me sometimes. And I just I can feel horribly guilty about not doing enough, and that can unmotivate me sometimes. But I want to hang on to the joy. I want to hang on to the inspiration. I got a little flash of that when Makungu was talking about going back and seeing buildings that he'd helped build when he was younger in Cuba. And I get another flash when I just hear Kelly talking about conquering an old fear and learning to play and claim some joy in the middle of a graveyard. Somehow that all connects to me to work that Jill and I have been involved in Rwanda for the last 15 or 20 years. And most recently, we've been trying to help some people who are recently hospitalized, freshly out of psychiatric hospitalization in Rwanda.
History.
We have a peer-to-peer help group to help each other reclaim lives after that. And we were really touched with this kind of peer-to-peer local work. And it's strange to me that I have to go to Rwanda to find an example of it that I get involved in and that I feel tugs at my heart. And that's one of those things I can get in these guilty loops about is, well, God, you can go to Rwanda and you can get involved in that, and you can raise funds for these people and help them out. And what are you doing in Evanston? You know, and why is it that it's harder to do in Evanston, or it seems harder to do, or I just get more in touch with my ineptitude and my lack of social skills when it's closer to home, I think. But that's the question I'm left with. That's the task that I'm glad I have a community such as each of you around me to help me stay supported in trying to stumble along and create this further world. So that's kind of where I'm sitting with this conversation right now.
So, Jean, you're thinking of closer to home?
You know, I don't know. I go back and forth about that. Maybe my skills are not close to home skills. Maybe my skills are more about creating this kind of community that we're sitting here talking with each other in, participating in things like this thing that Steve and the NTI has put together. That's a ripple all the way around the world. And I think maybe that's more what I belong doing. But I am drawn to this localism as a balance to globalism and wanting to keep things small and thinking that there's stuff but the place I know to facilitate that is these people I've been drawn to in Rwanda. So, you know, it's some of both.
I think it's easy, looking at a different culture, we can appreciate and learn things that, for me anyway, that I might take for granted or not, or be blind to in my own context. And for me, it's sort of like the next step is then how do I use that to help me in my own context? So I'm thinking about both at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I just want to add to the celebration stories that at this time, and there, Kelly, you were talking about the balloons and birthday, and Maggie, you're talking about the glow sticks and dance and music. And a story that I didn't see, but a friend of ours who lives pretty close, but not right, you know, on our block, was telling me that on her block, a 5-year-old had a birthday, and the neighbors were sort of talking about it. And what they decided to do was everybody on the block put pictures and balloons and happy birthday signs in their windows. And so it was arranged beforehand. And then the parents took this 5-year-old on a walk around the block. And he got to read and see everything in each of those windows. I wish I knew about it before those were taken down, but I imagine it. And he apparently was just really thrilled.
Just one other quick image that came to me, that somehow the glow sticks and the Day of the Dead went together with the graveyard in my head. And just glow sticks and sinking into a grave and thinking you're going to die, and thinking about Day of the Dead celebrations. That's a wonderful stew.
And Sarah Hughes has written, "I'm going to go get glow sticks."
Definitely do that.
Somebody else says, I have a bunch.
Yeah.
We have a saying in our family that the best stories are from, you know, kind of these degrading, uncomfortable situations. So I'm imagining Maggie's boys telling this story for many years to come.
Yeah.
I can't believe my mom made me do this. We often joke about the stories we're going to tell Philippa about, you know, her dead friends, and you know that was who she was friends with during quarantine 2020. So
and there is something about conquering fears, conquering embarrassment, and the kind of intimacy that we all crave and don't know if we can live up to or stand, you know.
And you know, I think this conversation has me thinking in a different way about something that's a little unexpected. So both of my parents gave their bodies to science when they died, and we don't have a cemetery, and I you know, that was fine with me. but you're really having me think about maybe a place is important in some way. And I just haven't, I just sort of took that for granted. I always knew, since I was an adult, I knew they were going to do that. And I just thought that was a good idea. Maybe I'd do the same. But it's got me thinking about, it's not, I think about them every day and honor them and hear their voices, but there might also be something about that ceremonial piece and place. So I just want to thank you for putting me in touch with that, sort of expanding the possibilities about that.
And that goes with this thread of ancestors and honoring ancestors that's come up at several points in the conversation to me. And to me, I've heard other people speak in ways that are very moving to me about not only owning the things you'd want to own from your ancestors, but also owning and taking responsibility in your generation for doing different than your ancestors did. And both of those things are just an awareness of that history and that legacy, I think, is important. Bukungu, you're nodding in a way I like. But
I was just appreciating what you were saying and agreeing with it, that those things are important.
Yeah. And I think having a place, Jill, when you shared that about having a place, I grew up going to cemeteries and watching my family members feel the person that they were visiting and talk to the person and laugh with and smoke cigarettes and have a few beers. There's very maybe different celebration. I don't know, maybe other people do this too, but really watching sort of a place to connect and feel their presence. And even as a kid, when I didn't know what was going on, I really did take that with me. I took something with me of my ancestors and whoever we were visiting.
I'm glad that you added that, because it reminds me that after both of my parents died, my father's brother and his wife, my aunt and uncle, had a tree planted in their honor in Forest Park in St. Louis. And this is a place, I grew up in St. Louis, and they spent a lot of their getting to know each other time in Forest Park. And so there's this tree that's their tree. And my aunt and uncle gave my brother and me a map that shows just where this tree is. And I'm just now thinking, I never thought about it this way until this conversation, but I'm now thinking we should go. That's the place.
Yeah.
So,
all right. Got a mission out of this conversation.
yeah.
Well, I see Steve there, and I think our time is nearly up.
We're coming to a close. Is there anything else that you guys would like to close with? Any thoughts or another breath?
So can everybody see?
Oh.
This is Philippa and I in the graveyard together. And then let me see if I can, and then that's a picture that my friend took.
Oh my gosh.
Nice.
Playing in the graveyard. So I wanted to share the visual of my really, really cute kid.
Thank you so much, Kelly.
I'm Steve. Thank you so much for this hour. I can certainly understand why Maggie and Kelly Makungu were desired guests for this. This hour was just incredible to have the privilege to listen in on this. The image I had was that, the stories that got woven just seemed so seamless, and just had like these gentle ocean swells following one another in just this beautiful way. Suzanne and Jean and Jill, thank you so much for helping this hour happen. I want to really shout out to Jill and all the relational work that she's done to help build a lot of the bridges for this Storython, along with, Peggy Sachs and Elmarie Coetzee. Just really, really helpful. So I want to acknowledge that in this moment. Also just want to thank Claire for the gracious hosting that Claire's done for the last few hours. Give me a chance to have her. So thank you, Claire.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It was a
Pleasure to be here.
And thank you, Steve, and all of NTI.
Yeah.